She was washing the dishes and singing, unaware of who was watching. The millionaire boss, mesmerized, couldn't take his eyes off her. The simple melody stirred memories in him he had tried to forget. And there, among glasses and soap, something was beginning that would change everything. If this story interests you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. We continue. Emily sang to the glass of cheap wine as if casting silent spells against the weariness of the world. The rented kitchen wasn't hers, but for a few minutes it became a sanctuary. The millionaire boss, who should have been absent as always, watched her from the doorway motionless, as if he'd stumbled upon a living painting that he didn't know whether to interrupt or collect. Richard Morgan was a man of silent excesses, excess of work, of wealth, of solitude. Owner of one of the largest development companies in Chicago, he lived in a mansion in Lake Forest that seemed more like a museum of contemporary architecture than a home. The silence was broken only by the steps of employees, who moved like shadows so as not to disturb him, until Emily arrived, bringing with her a presence that was impossible to ignore. The tiredness in her eyes didn't extinguish the light that overflowed in her words, in her singing, in her gestures. Richard observed her, fascinated by how she transformed simple ingredients into dishes that told stories. "This banana pie is my grandmother's recipe," she explained, not realizing that her boss was watching her. She used to say food without history is like music without lyrics. And then she began to sing softly again, a melody that spoke of rivers and longing. Richard entered the kitchen, making her start. "I'm sorry, Mr. Morgan, I'm almost finished," she said, embarrassed at being caught in her intimate moment. He made a distracted gesture with his hand. "Please continue, your voice, it complements the smell of the kitchen." It was the closest thing to a compliment he could formulate, after years of speaking only in numbers and contracts. "Are you all right, sir?" "You look tired," Emily asked, surprising them both with her boldness. Nobody asked Richard Morgan how he was. People asked about his projects, his investments, his decisions, never about him. "I'm fine," he replied automatically, only to correct himself. "Actually, no, I haven't slept properly for weeks." It was the first of many confessions to come. Emily served him a piece of the still warm pie and sat at the kitchen table, a neutral territory where for a few moments they weren't employer and employee, but just two people sharing the invisible weight they carried on their shoulders. The next day, the phone rang early. It was Nancy, Richard's secretary. "Emily, there's been a mistake. You were hired for Dr. Richard Miller's house, not Mr. Richard Morgan's. We've been trying to sort this out since yesterday, when we noticed the error." Emily felt her stomach sink. She needed this job. She couldn't afford to waste time with administrative errors. "How much time do I have?" she asked, already thinking about the commitments she had made based on that salary. "Mr. Morgan asked for you to continue until further notice," Nancy replied, with a note of curiosity in her voice. It was unusual for Richard to postpone decisions, especially when it came to something as trivial as hiring an employee. Emily hung up the phone and took a deep breath. Something about that house bothered her. The ostentatious luxury contrasted with the emotional emptiness that hung in the air. The perfectly aligned paintings on the walls seemed to fulfill a decorative function rather than express any personal taste. It was as if Richard Morgan lived in a setting, not a home. While setting the table for breakfast, Emily looked out the window and saw her boss walking alone through the garden, talking on his cell phone. There was something deeply lonely about his figure, with his impeccable suits and rigid posture. How could someone with so much seem to have so little? Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the doorbell. It was Lisa, Emily's sister, who appeared without prior notice. "I needed to see you," she said, with restless eyes and slightly trembling hands. Emily felt her heart tighten. The episodes were coming back, and she didn't know how much time she had before the situation worsened. But as she always did, she smiled and hugged her sister, trying to convey a confidence she didn't feel. "Come, let's talk outside," she suggested, guiding Lisa to the back of the house, where a small pergola offered shade. She didn't want Richard to see her there. Not yet. Her personal and professional life needed to remain separate, especially now that her job was hanging by a thread. Richard, however, was returning from his walk precisely along that path. Upon seeing Emily with a stranger, he hesitated. There was something in her expression, a mixture of protection and concern that intrigued him. He decided to take another path, respecting that moment which clearly didn't belong to him. But the image was etched in his mind. Emily, always so composed and confident in the kitchen, now seemed vulnerable and frightened. That night, while serving dinner, Emily seemed distant. Richard noticed but didn't comment. He had learned over the years that some distances shouldn't be crossed. However, when she accidentally dropped a wine glass, staining the white tablecloth red, he saw the tears she was trying to hold back. "It's just a tablecloth," he said with a gentleness that surprised them both. "Some stains come out easily, others—" He left the sentence hanging in the air, as if speaking of much deeper wounds than that red mark on the white fabric. Emily nodded, grateful for the unexpected understanding. "Thank you," she murmured, beginning to collect the glass shards. Her fingers trembled slightly, and she breathed deeply to control herself. There were more shards in her life than she could gather alone, more stains than she could clean. Richard observed her in silence, feeling an inexplicable connection with this woman who had entered his life by mistake. Both carried invisible burdens, both fought silent battles, and in that fleeting instant he realized that perhaps they didn't need to be alone in this struggle. It was just the beginning of a journey that would change both forever. Lisa appeared again the next morning, this time more agitated. Emily found her at the back gate, talking rapidly about voices and hidden messages. "They're everywhere, Emily. In the walls, in the mirrors, even in the food," she said, with eyes widened in genuine terror. Emily felt the familiar weight of powerlessness. The medications weren't working as well as before, and the psychiatrist appointments were too expensive for her tight budget. She held her sister's hands, trying to anchor her to reality. "I'm here, Lisa. No one is going to hurt you, I promise." Richard, who had come downstairs to get a book he had forgotten in the living room, stopped when he heard the voices. He didn't intend to eavesdrop, but something in the urgency of the dialogue kept him still. "You need to take your medicine, Lisa, please," Emily begged. "I'll find a way to get more appointments, I swear." He moved away silently, disturbed by the evident pain in Emily's voice. There was a secret there that explained many things. The permanent tiredness in her eyes, the way she saved every penny, the urgency with which she had accepted the job even knowing it was a mistake. That afternoon, while Emily was preparing lunch, Richard entered the kitchen with an envelope in his hands. "Your advance," he said, placing it on the table, "and a bonus for exceptional dedication." Before she could protest, he added, "It's not charity, Emily. It's recognition." She looked at the envelope, divided between pride and necessity. "Thank you," she finally said, gratitude and relief evident in her voice. "This helps a lot." What she didn't say, and didn't need to say, was that the money meant a few more weeks of stability for Lisa, a few more nights of peaceful sleep. While putting away the envelope, Emily noticed a glint under the living room sofa. Bending down to see better, she discovered a delicate gold bracelet with a butterfly-shaped pendant. It was obviously expensive and seemed to have sentimental value. Without thinking twice, she picked it up and put it in her pocket. She would give it to Richard later. But when he arrived for dinner, something in his closed expression made her hesitate. He seemed worried, distant. "Is something wrong?" she asked while serving the soup. Richard made a vague gesture with his hand. "Nothing important. Just memories that come back when we least expect them." Emily decided not to mention the bracelet at that moment. There was something in his momentary vulnerability that touched her. Perhaps it would be better to wait for a more appropriate moment, when he would be more receptive. She put the object in her bag, promising herself that she would return it the next day. The night progressed, and Emily was preparing to leave when she heard music coming from Richard's office. Curious, she approached the slightly open door. He was sitting in an armchair looking at some distant point, while a melancholic melody filled the room. Not wanting to intrude on such an intimate moment, she began to move away. "You can come in, Emily," he said, surprising her. "This music reminds me of simpler times." There was something different in his voice, a softness she had never noticed before. "It was the last song I danced with my ex-wife before we separated." Emily entered hesitantly, not quite sure how to react to this unexpected confession. "Music has that power, doesn't it? To transport us through time," she commented, sitting at a respectful distance. "You sing," he observed, not as a question but as a statement. "I hear you sometimes when you're in the kitchen. You have a gift." She blushed slightly, disconcerted by the compliment. "It's just a habit. My grandmother used to say a kitchen without music is like a sky without stars." The memory brought a smile to her lips. "She taught me to sing while I cooked. She said the flavor is better when we put our voice into the food." Richard smiled, a rare gesture that completely transformed his face, softening the worry, lines that normally marked it. "Your grandmother seemed to be a wise woman." "She was," agreed Emily, feeling a pang of longing. "She was the one who raised me after my parents left us. She avoided the word death, a wound that still hurt even after so many years. She took care of me and Lisa alone until—" Her voice faltered. "Until?" Richard encouraged, genuinely interested. "Until she couldn't anymore," completed Emily without elaborating. There were stories she wasn't ready to share yet, even in that moment of unexpected closeness. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was as if both recognized the empty spaces in their narratives, the parts that still couldn't be spoken aloud. The music continued playing, creating an invisible bridge between two worlds that, until a few days ago, seemed irreconcilably distant. "I need to go," Emily finally said, standing up. "Lisa is waiting for me." She hesitated, feeling the weight of the bracelet in her bag. It still wasn't the right time. Tomorrow, she promised herself again. Tomorrow, she would return it. Richard nodded, gradually returning to his usual self, but something had changed between them. The door had been left ajar, and neither was sure what they would find on the other side. As she walked to the bus stop, Emily thought about how life could change direction so quickly. A week ago, she never would have imagined working in the house of one of Chicago's most influential businessmen, much less sharing moments of silent complicity with him. The administrative error that had led her there was beginning to seem less like a coincidence and more like one of those strange detours that fate sometimes places in our path. The small apartment she shared with Lisa seemed even smaller when compared to Richard's mansion, but it was the only place where Emily could truly be herself. She found her sister sleeping on the couch, with the TV on a music channel. Careful not to wake her, she covered her with a blanket and turned off the device. The next morning, Emily woke up determined to return the bracelet. But upon arriving at the mansion, she found Richard in a tense meeting with Jake, his partner and childhood friend. "We need to cut costs, Richard," he was saying, with a folder of documents open on the table. "The expansion in the South is consuming more resources than we anticipated." "I'm not going to fire 300 families to please shareholders, Jake," Richard replied, with a firmness that Emily had never witnessed before. "Find another solution." "There are always consequences," Jake insisted, closing the folder with an exasperated sigh. "Sometimes we need to make tough decisions for the greater good." "The greater good of whom?" questioned Richard, standing up. "Our bank accounts?" Emily backed away silently, not wanting to be seen. There was a dimension of Richard that she completely unknown, the businessman, the decision-maker who affected hundreds of lives. It was easy to forget that when she saw him alone listening to music in his office, vulnerable and human. The bracelet weighed in her pocket, reminding her that there were still secrets and stories not yet revealed. She decided to wait a bit longer. The time for truths had not yet fully arrived. In the afternoon, while organizing the pantry, Emily found an invitation on the kitchen table. It was for a charity event of the Morgan Foundation, which would take place at the end of the week. "Annual Grand Gala, for the benefit of children with special needs," said the elegant golden card. Below, a handwritten note, "Confirm singer by Wednesday." Richard entered the kitchen while she was reading the invitation. "Our main singer. Cancelled at the last minute," he explained, pouring himself coffee. "A health issue, apparently. We're desperately trying to find someone in 3 days." Emily returned the invitation to the table, an idea forming in her mind. It was risky, perhaps even foolish, but the words came out before she could contain. "The boy can sing." Richard looked at her, surprised. "You would sing? At an event of this scale?" "Why not?" she replied, trying to sound more confident than she really felt. "I've performed in bars and small events before, and if it's to help..." He observed her attentively, as if seeing her for the first time. "I'm curious to hear you sing for real, not just in the kitchen," he finally admitted. "But are you sure? There will be more than 200 people, many of them important in the city." Emily hesitated. It was a unique opportunity, not only to perform, but to help the cause. And the fee, which would certainly be generous, could solve her financial problems for a good while. "I have one condition," she said, surprising herself with her own boldness. "I don't want my name to appear anywhere. I'll just be the guest singer." Richard frowned, intrigued. "Why?" "I have my reasons," she replied simply, without elaborating. She couldn't explain that she feared exposure, that she had preferred to remain in the shadows since Lisa's condition had become public knowledge in their hometown, forcing them to move to Chicago in search of anonymity. "All right," he agreed, extending his hand as if closing a formal agreement. "It will be as you wish, the mystery singer." Emily smiled, feeling a mixture of excitement and apprehension. She was about to enter a world that wasn't hers, and had no idea what she would find there. In the days leading up to the event, Emily divided herself between her household duties, furtive rehearsals when she was alone, and hasty visits to Lisa, who seemed to be in a period of relative stability. The bracelet remained in her possession, kept in a small box in her bag. She had decided to return it after the event, when her future in the house would be more secure. On the night of the Fête de Gala, Emily transformed herself. The simple but elegant dress that Richard had insisted on providing for her fit perfectly, highlighting her natural beauty without exaggeration. In the backstage of the luxurious event hall, she felt her heart beating strongly against her ribs. It was different from her performances in small bars. Here, every detail was meticulously planned. Every note would be heard by demanding ears. "Nervous?" asked Richard, appearing stealthily behind her. Dressed in an impeccable tuxedo, he seemed even more imposing than usual. But there was something different in his eyes when he looked at her, a gentleness, perhaps even an admiration, that transcended the employer-employee relationship. "A little," she admitted, adjusting the simple necklace that completed her. "Look, but it's a good nervousness, the kind that makes us grow." He smiled, a gesture increasingly less rare in her presence. "You're going to shine, Emily. I'm sure of it." He hesitated for a moment, as if wanting to say something more, but was interrupted by one of the organizers, announcing that it was time. Emily went up on stage while being announced simply as a special voice for a special night. The lights softened, and she closed her eyes for an instant, concentrating. When the first note left her lips, there was no more nervousness, only the pure joy of doing what she loved. Her voice filled the hall, rich and moving, singing about dreams, hope, and new beginnings. In the audience, Richard watched her with an expression that mixed pride and something deeper, more personal. Never in all his years of charity events had he felt so connected to the real purpose of those gatherings. When the last note faded, there was a moment of reverent silence before the room exploded in applause. Emily thanked with a shy smile, and quickly withdrew as agreed. She wouldn't stay for the reception, wouldn't answer questions about who she was or where she came from. Her agreement with Richard was clear. She would sing and disappear, maintaining her anonymity. She changed quickly in one of the dressing rooms and was about to leave through the back when she felt a hand on her shoulder. It was Jake, Richard's partner. "Impressive performance," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You have a gift." "Thank you," replied Emily, uncomfortable with the way he was observing her. There was something predatory in his gaze, something that made her want to step back. "Richard is lucky to have found you," he continued, moving a bit closer. "He always had a special talent for discovering talents. Before Emily could respond, the dressing room door opened and Richard entered, stopping abruptly upon seeing the two. "Is everything okay?" he asked, his casual tone contrasting with the evident tension in his posture. "Of course," replied Jake, moving away from Emily. "I was just congratulating our mystery singer. You two really surprised us today." And with a casual wave, he left the dressing room, leaving an unsettling feeling in the air. Richard approached Emily, concern evident in his gaze. "Did he say something that bothered you?" "No," she lied, not wanting to create problems. "I just felt a little uncomfortable with the approach, but nothing major." He nodded, not seeming entirely convinced. Jake can be intense sometimes, but his heart is in the right place. There was a note of doubt in his voice, as if trying to convince himself of that statement. "I need to go," said Emily, looking at the clock. "Lisa is alone, and I promise not to arrive too late." At the mention of her sister, she saw curiosity in Richard's eyes. She knew he had witnessed part of her conversation with Lisa days ago, but he had never mentioned the fact, respecting her privacy. Now, however, she felt she owed some kind of explanation. "My sister has schizophrenia," she said simply. "It's been that way since adolescence." Richard showed no surprise or discomfort, only a silent understanding. "It must be difficult," he commented without pity or condescension in his voice, just genuine empathy. "It is," agreed Emily, grateful for his reaction, especially because she refuses to live in any institution. She prefers to be at home with me. What Emily didn't say was how much this complicated her life, how each decision she made was influenced by Lisa's needs, how her own dreams had been repeatedly postponed. Richard remained silent for a moment, as if digesting this information. Finally, he handed her an envelope. "Your fee as agreed and a bonus. You exceeded all expectations." Emily accepted the envelope with a mixture of gratitude and pride. It wasn't charity, it was recognition for her talent and work. "Thank you for trusting me," she said, feeling that the words were insufficient to express what that opportunity meant. As she left the event, Emily didn't imagine that her life was about to change even more drastically. What had begun as an administrative error was transforming into an intricate game of intertwined destinies, where each revelation would bring with it new questions and each choice irreversible consequences. On the following Monday, the atmosphere in the mansion was different. Richard had left early for an important meeting, leaving Emily alone with her thoughts and chores. While tidying the living room, she noticed a newspaper on the coffee table. On the first page of the culture section, a headline caught her attention. "The mysterious voice that enchanted Chicago's elite." Emily's heart accelerated. She approached and picked up the newspaper, reading the article avidly. "An unknown singer caused a sensation at the Morgan Foundation's charity event last Friday," the text said. "Her identity remains a mystery, but close sources guarantee that she is a new discovery of businessman Richard Morgan, known for his good taste and connections in the music world." There were no photos of her, thanks to her insistence on remaining anonymous, but the description was detailed enough that anyone who had been at the event could recognize her. Emily felt a chill. She didn't want exposure, didn't want to be recognized on the street, didn't want to risk her past in Denver coming to light. She put the newspaper back, trying to calm herself. It was probably nothing. A small article which would be forgotten in a few days, but the seed of concern was already planted. While preparing lunch, she was interrupted by the sound of the doorbell. Upon opening the door, she found herself face to face with a middle-aged man, formally dressed. "Good afternoon," he said, handing her a business card. "I'm Anthony Vasquez, music producer. I'd like to speak with the singer who performed at the Morgan Foundation event." Emily paled. "I think you're mistaken," she replied, trying to keep her voice firm. "There's no singer here." The man smiled, clearly not believing her denial. "Please, just tell her I have an interesting proposal, something that could change her life." And with a polite nod, he moved away toward the car that was waiting for him. Emily closed the door, feeling the panic grow. It was exactly what she feared: the unwanted attention, the questions, the gradual invasion of her privacy. She needed to talk to Richard, to understand how her anonymity had been compromised. When he returned in the afternoon, Emily confronted him immediately, showing him the newspaper and reporting the visit from the producer. Richard seemed genuinely surprised and concerned. "I didn't talk to anyone in the press about you, Emily," he assured her. "It must have been someone from the organization or your partner," she completed, remembering the uncomfortable encounter backstage. "Jake seemed very interested in knowing more about me." Richard frowned, considering the possibility. "I'll talk to him. This shouldn't have happened." He hesitated, observing Emily's anguished expression. "But perhaps it's not such a bad thing. You have an extraordinary talent. Why hide it?" "I have my reasons," she replied firmly, "and you promised to respect my anonymity." There was an unusual hardness in her voice, a line she rarely crossed with her boss. He nodded, respecting her decision, even without completely understanding it. "I'll do my best to contain the damage," he promised. "But know that, if you ever change your mind, I'll be proud to help you be recognized for your talent." Emily thanked him with a brief nod, still disturbed by the events. As she moved away to continue her chores, she suddenly remembered the bracelet that was still in her possession. With everything that had happened, she had completely forgotten to return it. Now it seemed even more difficult to do so without raising suspicions. Why had she kept it for so long? How to explain this hesitation without seeming dishonest? She decided she needed to act. That night during dinner, she would tell the truth about the bracelet, but the events would take an unexpected turn, forever changing the course of the relationship between them. Dinner was served, the table impeccably set with the best china, but Richard barely touched the food. He seemed distracted, worried about something he wasn't sharing. Emily observed him discreetly, trying to find the right moment to mention the bracelet. "Is everything all right?" she finally asked, while collecting the practically untouched plates. Richard looked up, as if only at that moment becoming aware of her presence. "I'm sorry, I'm being a terrible dinner companion today." He ran his hand through his hair, a rare gesture of vulnerability. "I received a call from my son's school today. Josh is having adaptation problems again." It was the first time Richard had mentioned having a son, and Emily couldn't hide her surprise. "I didn't know you had a son," she commented, trying not to sound accusatory. "Josh lives with his mother most of the time," he explained, with a note of sadness in his voice. "The divorce wasn't amicable, and with my schedule it became more practical for him to stay with Sarah." He hesitated, as if deciding how much to reveal. "Besides, Josh has special needs. He's autistic. He needs routine, stability." Emily sat at the table, momentarily forgetting her role as an employee. "It must be difficult to be away from him," she said softly. Richard smiled without joy. "It is. But sometimes I wonder if my presence makes any difference. Josh lives in his own world. He rarely responds when I talk to him, never looks me in the eyes." He stopped abruptly, as if realizing he was revealing too much. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't be burdening you with my personal problems." "Don't worry," replied Emily, feeling a deeper connection form between them. "Sometimes we just need someone to listen." She hesitated, gathering courage for what she needed to do. "Richard, I need to tell you something." At that moment, the phone rang, interrupting her. Richard answered with an apologetic expression. His expression quickly changed as he listened to the person on the other end of the line. "What? When?" he asked, rising abruptly. "I'm coming right now." He hung up and looked at Emily, concern evident in his eyes. "Josh had a collapse at school. I need to go there." He was already heading for the door, grabbing the car keys. "I'm sorry, we'll have to continue our conversation later." And so he left, leaving Emily with the unspoken confession and the bracelet still hidden in her bag. She felt divided between concern for Richard and his son and the growing guilt for keeping that secret. That night, upon arriving home, she found Lisa in one of her episodes. Her sister was walking back and forth in the small living room, talking to invisible people, responding to voices that only she could hear. Emily sat patiently by her side, speaking in a low and reassuring voice until finally Lisa agreed to take her medication and lay down, exhausted. Observing her sleeping sister, Emily reflected on the day's revelations. Richard also carried a cross, also knew the weight of loving someone who lived in a world different from his own. This discovery created a new bond between them, a mutual understanding that transcended their social and economic differences. The next morning, Emily arrived earlier at the mansion, determined to finalize that interrupted conversation. But Richard had already left, leaving only a message. "I spent the night at the hospital with Josh. I'll be away until tomorrow. If you need anything, call my cell phone." The mention of the hospital made Emily worry. How serious would the boy's collapse be? She felt an irrational impulse to go there to offer support, but restrained herself. Her relationship with Richard, as much as it was evolving, still had clear limits. She spent the day performing her usual tasks, feeling the house strangely empty, without Richard's distant but constant presence. In the afternoon, while arranging the library, she found a photo album forgotten on a table. Normally, she wouldn't allow herself such an invasion of privacy, but something compelled her to open it. The first pages showed a younger Richard, smiling alongside a beautiful woman she presumed to be Sarah, his ex-wife. As she advanced through the album, photos of baby Josh appeared. Then as a small child, he was a beautiful boy with his father's expressive eyes, though his gaze rarely directed at the camera. On the last page, a recent photo, Josh, now about 10 years old, sitting on a garden bench. Richard was beside him, not exactly hugging him, but with his hand gently resting on his shoulder. There was a distance between them that wasn't physical, but emotional, an invisible barrier that both seemed unable to cross. Emily closed the album, feeling like an intruder in a world of particular pain. There was so much she didn't know about Richard, so many layers beyond the successful and authoritarian businessman she had initially met. When Richard returned the next day, he seemed exhausted. Emily prepared him a strong coffee and waited for him to speak without pressing him. "Josh is better," he finally said. "It was just a more intense episode than usual. Changes in routine always affect him deeply." "I'm glad he's better," replied Emily sincerely. She hesitated, knowing she needed to resume that interrupted conversation. "Richard, before you left yesterday, I was about to tell you something important." He looked at her expectantly, and Emily took a deep breath, gathering courage. "I found this a few days ago," she said, taking the bracelet from her pocket. "It was under the living room sofa. I should have given it to you immediately, but for some reason I hesitated." Richard looked at the jewelry, an indefinable expression crossing his face. "My mother's butterfly bracelet," he murmured, taking it delicately. "I thought I had lost it forever." "I'm sorry for not returning it sooner," apologized Emily, fearing his reaction. "I don't know why I kept it. It was a mistake." To her surprise, Richard didn't seem angry. "Thank you for finding it and returning it," he said simply. "It has enormous sentimental value for me. It was the last gift I gave my mother before her passing." Emily nodded, relieved by his understanding. "I imagined it was something important, the way the butterfly was crafted. It's a unique piece." "My mother loved butterflies," explained Richard, a melancholy smile playing on his lips. "She said they were symbols of transformation, of second chances, something she always sought in her life." There was a story there, Emily realized, something deeper than he was willing to share at that moment. She respected his silence, knowing that each revelation between them happened in its own time. "I hide things sometimes too," she admitted, feeling she owed this honesty after her lapse with the bracelet. "I didn't tell the whole truth about Lisa, for example." Richard raised an eyebrow, curious. "What do you mean?" "I let you think her condition was recent, something I'm learning to deal with. But the truth is I've taken care of her alone since I was 19 when our grandmother passed away." Emily felt the weight of those years on her shoulders as she spoke. "I abandoned college, gave up many dreams. I don't regret it, but sometimes I wonder what my life would be like if the circumstances were different." Richard observed her with a new understanding, seeing beyond the efficient employee, beyond the talented singer, seeing the woman who had sacrificed so much for love. "You're stronger than you appear, Emily," he finally commented. And more. Talented than you imagine. She smiled shyly, uncomfortable with the compliment. I just do what needs to be done, like all of us. Not all, he corrected, twirling the bracelet between his fingers. Many choose the easier path when confronted. With difficulties, I myself... He stopped, leaving the sentence incomplete, but Emily understood. His distance from Josh, his immersion in work, they were forms of escape, of avoiding the pain of failure as a father. That afternoon, while Richard worked in his office, Emily received a call that would again change the course of events. It was Nancy, his executive secretary. Emily, an unforeseen situation has come up. Mr. Morgan needs to travel urgently to the south tonight. A situation with the new branch in Atlanta. I understand, replied Emily, already thinking about the arrangements she would need to make. How long will he be away? At least a week. There was a hesitant pause. Actually, Emily, he asked if you would accept a somewhat unusual proposal. What proposal? She questioned, intrigued. Richard would like you to accompany Jake and the investors at a company charity dinner tomorrow night. As a singer, not as... well, you understand. Emily felt an unpleasant shiver. Working for Richard was one thing. Performing at Jake's request, for whom she felt no trust whatsoever, was completely different. Why didn't he ask me directly? He's in an important video conference right now. He asked me to check your availability urgently. Emily hesitated. Part of her wanted to refuse immediately, protect her anonymity, avoid more exposure. But another part felt indebted to Richard after the bracelet episode and knew how important this dinner was for the project in the South, the same project he had refused to compromise, even under pressure to cut costs. Tell him I'll accept, but with the same conditions as before. No mention of my name, no photos, no publicity. I'll relay the message, Nancy assured, before hanging up. Minutes later, Richard appeared in the kitchen, looking relieved. Nancy told me you... Accepted, thank you, Emily. I know this goes beyond your obligations. Don't worry, she replied, trying to sound more confident than she felt. I would just like to understand better what they expect from me at this dinner. It's a small performance, just to set the mood for the event, while we discuss the social project that will accompany the company's expansion in Atlanta. Richard hesitated, noticing her apprehension. If you're uncomfortable with the idea of working with Jake, I can cancel my trip and... No, interrupted Emily firmly. You need to resolve this situation in Atlanta. I can handle a dinner. Richard nodded, grateful but visibly concerned. Jake can seem difficult sometimes, but he's a good man. I've trusted him for more than 20 years. Emily didn't comment, but something in her instinct told her to stay alert. There was more to this story than Richard was willing or able to see. That night, after Richard left for the airport, Emily remained in the mansion, mentally preparing for the next day's event. While rehearsing the song she planned to present, her cell phone rang. It was an unknown number. Hello? She answered, cautious. Emily Wilson. The male voice on the other end sounded vaguely familiar. This is Anthony Vasquez, music producer. I visited Mr. Morgan's residence a few days ago. Emily felt her stomach sink. How had he gotten her number? How can I help you, Mr. Vasquez? I have a proposal that I believe will interest you. Your performance at the Morgan Foundation event was exceptional. I'd like to discuss the possibility of recording some tracks with you. I appreciate the interest, replied Emily firmly, but I'm not looking for a music career at the moment. I understand your hesitation, he insisted, but the label I represent is especially interested in authentic talents like yours. We could work respecting your conditions, including your desire for anonymity, if that's important to you. The offer was tempting, more tempting than Emily would like to admit. For years, she had abandoned the dream of singing professionally to care for Lisa. Now the opportunity appeared before her, like a ripe fruit ready to be picked. How did you get my number? She asked, diverting from the proposal. There was a pause. A mutual friend, replied Vasquez evasively. Someone who believes in your potential as much as I do. Emily felt a chill. I appreciate it again, but my answer remains no. Please don't contact me again. And she hung up, her mind buzzing with unsettling possibilities. Who would this mutual friend be? Richard? Unlikely, considering his respect for her privacy. Jake? The thought disturbed her. If he was involved, what would his true intentions be? With these doubts in mind, Emily fell asleep in one of the guest rooms of the mansion, preparing for a day that announced itself as challenging as it was unpredictable. Dawn broke cloudy, as if the weather reflected Emily's apprehension. She prepared meticulously for the dinner, choosing a simple but elegant dress that Richard had provided for her. While applying discreet makeup, her cell phone rang again. It was Lisa. "Emily, you won't believe it. I received a call from a man who said he was a music producer. He said he wanted to talk to you about an incredible opportunity." Lisa's voice oscillated between excitement and confusion. "He talked about recordings, shows, contracts. He said you would be a star." Emily's blood froze. "What else did he say, Lisa? And how did he get our home number?" "I don't know," replied her sister, the initial excitement giving way to uncertainty. "He knew my name, knew I was your sister. He said it would be good for both of us, that we could have a better life." "Lisa, listen carefully," said Emily, trying to keep her voice calm despite the growing panic. "Don't talk to this man again. Don't give any information about us. I'll resolve this, okay?" She hung up, feeling violated and exposed. Someone had investigated her personal life, discovered about Lisa, found her address and phone. The situation was completely getting out of control. At that moment, the mansion's phone rang. It was Jake, confirming the details for the dinner. Emily responded mechanically, her mind still processing what she had just discovered. She needed to talk to Richard, but he would be in mid-flight to Atlanta now. "Is everything all right, Emily?" asked Jake, noticing her distant tone. "You seem worried." "I'm fine," she lied, "just mentally reviewing the repertoire for tonight." "I know this is a big favor you're doing for Richard," he commented, in a tone that seemed sincerely grateful. "It means a lot for the project, for all of us." Something in the way he spoke made Emily reconsider her suspicions. Perhaps she was being unfair to Jake. Perhaps he had nothing to do with the insistent producer or with the invasion of her privacy. "I'll do my best," she promised, deciding to give him the benefit of the doubt for now. The dinner would be held at an exclusive restaurant on top of one of Chicago's most prestigious buildings. When Emily arrived, accompanied by a driver sent by Jake, the event was already in full swing. Approximately 30 people, investors, executives, and some local politicians, chatted animatedly, champagne glasses in hand. Jake came to receive her, impeccably dressed in a dark suit. "Emily, welcome. Your participation is the highlight of the night." He guided her through the hall, introducing her simply as our talented guest singer, without ever mentioning her full name or her connection to Richard, as promised. The presentation went smoothly. Emily sang 3 songs, receiving enthusiastic applause. Her voice, rich and moving, created an engaging atmosphere that seemed to enchant all those present. After the performance, Jake insisted that she stay for dinner. "Richard would be disappointed if he knew you left without enjoying the meal," he argued, pulling out a chair for her. "Besides, the investors are fascinated. Your presence can help close the deal." Reluctantly, Emily accepted. She was seated between an elderly gentleman, who she later discovered was the main investor in the project, and an elegant lady who presided over an important cultural foundation. "Your voice is extraordinary, my dear," commented the lady during the appetizer. "It reminds me of the great American interpreters of the 60s. It has that rare quality of conveying emotion without exaggeration." "Thank you," replied Emily, uncomfortable with the attention, but polite as always. "It's very kind of you." "You know," continued the lady, leaning in confidentially, "I direct a foundation that supports young talents. We could talk about possibilities for someone with your gift." Before Emily could respond, Jake, who was following the conversation, closely intervened. "Mrs. Bennett, Emily is a recent discovery and is still carefully considering her next steps. I'm sure Richard would be delighted to discuss possible collaborations when he returns from Atlanta." There was something protective in his tone that surprised Emily, Perhaps she had misjudged Jake. Perhaps he was really respecting her wishes for privacy. The dinner proceeded without further incidents. Emily participated minimally in the conversations, observing the dynamics between those present. Jake was clearly an excellent host, charming, attentive, skillful in directing discussions to the company's points of interest. At the end of the night, when the guests began to disperse, Jake approached Emily again. "Thank you," he said, with apparent sincerity. "Your participation was fundamental. The investors are fully committed to the project now." "I'm glad I could help," she replied politely. Richard seemed very concerned about this expansion. "Richard always worries." "Too much," commented Jake with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, "especially in recent years, since the divorce and the situation with Josh." He hesitated, as if carefully choosing his next words. "He's lucky to have found you, Emily. He seems more balanced since you arrived." Emily didn't know how to respond to this unexpectedly personal observation. Before she could formulate an adequate response, Jake continued, "By the way, a friend of mine was particularly impressed with your performance. Anthony Vasquez, perhaps you've heard of him. He's one of the most respected producers in the country." And there it was, the confirmation of her suspicions. Jake was the connection to the insistent producer, probably also the source of the invasion of her privacy. "Actually, Mr. Vasquez contacted me," replied Emily, keeping her voice neutral despite the growing anger. "And my sister too, curiously." Jake had the decency to appear momentarily disconcerted. "Ah, I see. He can be somewhat enthusiastic in his approach, but believe me, Emily, he only has good intentions, as do I." "Good intentions don't justify invasion of privacy," she retorted, firm, but without raising her voice. "And I don't remember authorizing anyone to share my contact information about my family." "You're right, and I apologize if this bothered you," replied Jake, quickly recovering his composure. "But think about it, Emily. You have an extraordinary gift. Why waste it? With the right connections, you could have the career you deserve, and at the same time provide a better life for your sister. Isn't that what you want?" It was a deliberately cruel question in its precision. Of course, Emily dreamed of a better life for Lisa, with more advanced treatments, a bigger house, the financial freedom she had never had. But at what cost would this opportunity come? And could she really trust Jake and his right connections? "I appreciate the concern," she finally replied, "but I prefer to make my own decisions about my future. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to go. My sister is waiting for me." Jake nodded, accepting defeat for now. "The driver is at your disposal, and Emily, think about what I said. The offer remains open." During the journey home, Emily reflected on the events of the night. There was something in Jake's insistence that deeply disturbed her. It wasn't just professional interest. It seemed almost a personal obsession. And even more disturbing, why so much effort to bring her to light when she had clearly expressed her desire to remain anonymous? Upon arriving home, she found Lisa sleeping peacefully, the night medications taken according to the schedule Emily had left noted on the refrigerator. At least that was under control. She sat on the small balcony of the apartment, observing the city lights, feeling the weight of the decisions she would need to make soon. Should she tell Richard about Jake's invasive approach? This could create a conflict between longtime partners, something she didn't wish to provoke. On the other hand, how could she continue working in an environment where her privacy was constantly threatened? And what about the proposal itself? Part of her, a part she rarely allowed herself to hear, yearned for that opportunity. Singing had always been her refuge, her form of escape. Transforming this passion into a profession was a dream she had abandoned long ago out of necessity, not by choice. Her phone vibrated with a message from Richard. "Everything okay there?" "Jake said you were incredible. Thank you for helping." Emily hesitated, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. Finally, she decided, "Everything went well. We need to talk when you return." The response came almost immediately. "Did something happen? I can call now." "Nothing urgent," she assured. "Better we talk in person." Richard seemed to accept this answer, saying goodbye with a simple, "Take care, back soon." Emily put away the phone, knowing she had crossed another invisible line in the complex relationship they were building. She was no longer just the employee concerned with work issues. She was someone who had personal matters to discuss, concerns to share, decisions to make together. In the days that followed, Emily kept herself busy with the house routine and caring for Lisa, who fortunately was going through a period of relative stability. There were no more contacts from the music producer, but the uneasiness persisted. Something was about to change, she could feel it. On Thursday, while shopping at the supermarket, Emily noticed a man who seemed to be following her between the two shelves. Each time she looked in his direction, he would avert his gaze or pretend to be examining products. With her heart racing, she abandoned her shopping halfway and quickly left, taking a taxi instead of her usual bus. Upon arriving home, she found an envelope without a return address in her mailbox. Inside, a preliminary contract with Anthony Vasquez music label, offering extremely generous conditions for a series of presentations and recordings. A handwritten note accompanied the document. "If you need time to think, we understand. But know that opportunities like this are rare. AV." The feeling of being watched, pressured, manipulated, intensified. Emily put the contract in her drawer, determined to show it to Richard as soon as he returned. She needed advice, a perspective that wasn't contaminated by hidden interests. Richard returned from Atlanta on Saturday, looking tired but satisfied. "The project is saved," he announced, finding Emily in the kitchen. "We got the necessary investments without compromising the social part. No one will be fired." "I'm glad," she replied sincerely, for she knew how much that meant to him. Jake must be relieved too. A shadow crossed Richard's face at the mention of his partner's name. Jake has a different vision about the company's social role. But we managed to reach an acceptable middle ground. Emily nodded, gathering courage for what she needed to say. "Richard, some things happened in your absence that concerned me." She told him about the music producer and his insistent approaches, about how he had obtained personal information about her and Lisa, about the man who seemed to be following her in the supermarket, and finally, about the unsolicited contract she had received. Richard listened to everything in silence, his expression gradually becoming darker. "And you believe Jake is behind all this?" he concluded, not as a question but as a statement. "He admitted to having recommended my name to Vasquez," confirmed Emily, "and he seemed very interested in convincing me to accept the proposal." Richard ran his hand through his hair, a gesture that Emily already identified as a sign of deep disturbance. "I'll talk to him. This has to stop immediately." "I don't want to cause problems between you," said Emily, momentarily regretting having been so direct. "I know you're longtime friends. This goes beyond friendship, Emily. It's a matter of respect and boundaries." Richard seemed genuinely indignant. "No one has the right to pressure you this way, much less using privileged information about your personal life." Emily felt a wave of gratitude for his immediate understanding and support. "There's one more thing," she said, remembering the contract. "I'd like you to take a look at this." She handed him the document, watching his reaction attentively. Richard examined the contract with professional attention, frowning at certain points. "This is surprisingly generous for a beginning artist," he commented, turning the pages. "Almost too generous, actually." "What do you mean?" "These clauses here," he pointed to several paragraphs marked in highlight. "They give the label almost total control over your public image, performance schedule, even the type of music you can record. In exchange for a considerable advance, it's true, but..." He shook his head, concerned. "It's the type of contract you make with someone who is desperate for money and has no experience in the artistic medium." Emily felt a shiver run down her spine. "So basically they would be buying control over my career and my life." "Exactly. And considering the insistence, the invasion of privacy, there's something very strange happening here." Richard folded the contract and returned it to Emily. "I'll talk to Jake tomorrow, clarify the situation once and for all." But fate had other plans. That same night, while they were dining in a rare moment of shared tranquility, the phone rang. It was Nancy, Richard's secretary, calling outside. Business hours, something she never did unless it was extremely urgent. "Richard," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "there's been a leak. A gossip blog published an article about the social project in Atlanta, questioning the company's true motivation and—" She hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with what she needed to say next. "They mention Emily. They say she is your special protégé, suggesting that her involvement in the project is not just professional." Richard visibly paled, exchanging a quick look with Emily. "Send me the link right now, Nancy, and prepare a preliminary statement denying any inappropriate insinuation." He hung up and immediately checked his email, where Nancy had already sent the mentioned link. Emily approached, reading over his shoulder, feeling her stomach turn with each word of the malicious text. The blog, known for its sensationalism and lack of scruples, spewed insinuations about the mysterious singer who had appeared out of nowhere in Richard Morgan's life, suggesting that her musical talent was just a disguise to cover an improper relationship. Worse still, there were photos. Emily entering the mansion, getting out of Richard's car, even a blurred image of her with Lisa, accompanied by the caption, "Who is the troubled young woman who accompanies Morgan's protégé?" "My God," murmured Emily, feeling her legs weaken. "How did they get these photos? How do they know about Lisa?" Richard seemed equally shocked and furious. "Someone followed us, spied on us. This is unacceptable." He stood up abruptly, grabbing the phone again. "I'm calling my lawyer right now. This is defamation, invasion of privacy, harassment." While he moved away to make the call, Emily remained motionless, trying to process what she had just read. Her worst projection was coming true. Her private life exposed, her name tarnished, Lisa dragged into the middle of a sordid situation. And why? What would be the purpose of such an attack? Richard returned minutes later, still visibly disturbed. "My lawyer will take care of this first thing in the morning. We'll sue the blog, demand a retraction, find out who leaked the information." "Do you think that Jake could be involved in this?" asked Emily hesitantly, almost afraid of the answer. Richard seemed to consider the possibility for a moment, but then shook his head. "I can't believe he would go that far. Pressuring you to accept a proposal is one thing. Orchestrating a defamation campaign is something completely different." Emily wasn't so sure, but preferred not to insist on the subject. Richard already seemed sufficiently shaken. "What do we do now?" she asked, trying to keep her voice firm despite the dread she felt. "First, we need to protect you and Lisa," he responded promptly. "It's not safe for you to stay in the apartment, at least for now. You can stay here, at the mansion. I have 24-hour security. No one will be able to bother you." The offer was tempting, the security of the mansion, the protection Richard could provide. But Emily hesitated. "Won't that just feed the rumors? If I move here, especially with Lisa—" "To hell with the rumors," interrupted Richard, with a vehemence that surprised her. "Your safety is more important than what they think of us." He paused, realizing what he had just said, the us that had naturally escaped his lips. "I mean, we can't let malicious speculations determine our actions." Emily nodded, recognizing the wisdom of his words. "You're right. I'll talk to Lisa, explain the situation in the best way possible." "Good, I'll send the driver to get you two today." Richard hesitated, then added in a low voice, "I'm sorry for all this, Emily. You didn't deserve to be dragged into this type of situation." "It's not your fault," she replied, lightly touching his arm in an instinctive gesture of comfort. "I'm sure we'll get through this together." The together hung between them, loaded with unspoken meanings, possibilities that both still feared to fully explore. But in that moment of crisis, one thing became clear. They were in fact together in that situation, united by something stronger than circumstances or social conventions. In the following hours, everything happened quickly. Richard's driver picked up Lisa, who received the news of the temporary move with surprising calmness. "I've always wanted to see a mansion from the inside," she commented, while gathering her essential belongings. "Is it like in the movies?" Emily smiled, relieved that her sister was having a good day, capable of processing the situation without panic or paranoia. "Better than in the movies," she assured, and Richard has an incredible library. You'll love it." When they arrived at the mansion, Richard received them personally, treating Lisa with a gentleness and respect that moved Emily. He showed them the quarters he had prepared, 2 comfortable suites connected by a small private living room, ensuring both proximity and privacy. "Thank you," said Emily when they finally were alone after settling Lisa in her new room. "Your generosity." "It's not generosity," he interrupted gently. "It's the least I can do, considering that you were dragged into this situation because of me." "It wasn't your fault," insisted Emily. "Someone is deliberately trying to harm us. The question is why?" Richard sighed, running his hand through his hair, that familiar gesture that Emily already associated with moments of greatest tension. "I have some theories, none of them pleasant, but I promise we'll find out who's behind this and why." That night, Emily took a long time to fall asleep, despite the comfort of the new room. Her mind was buzzing with unanswered questions, with concerns about the future, with fear for Lisa's well-being. When she finally managed to sleep, it was a restless sleep, populated by confused dreams where unknown voices called her from an illuminated stage, while invisible cameras followed her through dark corridors. The following day brought new developments. The defamatory article had been removed from the blog after intervention by Richard's lawyers, but the damage was already done. Other media outlets picked up the story, some questioning the ethics of Morgan development, others speculating about the identity of the mystery singer and her true relationship with the businessman. "We need a more definitive strategy," decided Richard after a long meeting with his legal team. "Something that ends this speculation once and for all." "What do you suggest?" asked Emily, concerned about the direction things might take. "Controlled transparency," he replied. "An official statement explaining that you are an employee contracted for specific events, without any other type of involvement. We can organize a press conference where I clarify the situation without you needing to appear personally." The idea made sense, but something about it deeply bothered Emily. "This makes me seem a coward, as if I were hiding, leaving you to face everything alone." Richard shook his head. "Not at all. I'm just protecting your privacy, as I promised, from the beginning." "But that's precisely what's being questioned, isn't it? My privacy, my anonymity. Why would Richard Morgan protect a simple employee so much, unless there was something more happening?" Emily sighed, feeling the weight of the decision she needed to make. Maybe it's time to take control of this narrative, to face all this head-on. Richard looked at her with a mixture of surprise and admiration. "What are you suggesting exactly?" "I want to participate in the press conference," she declared, with a determination that surprised them both. "I want to tell my own story, explain why I preferred anonymity until now, make it clear that nothing inappropriate happened between us." "Are you sure?" asked Richard, visibly concerned. "Once you appear publicly, there's no going back. Your life will never be the same." Emily nodded slowly, feeling the weight of that truth. "My life already changed irrevocably the moment I entered this house by mistake. Perhaps it's time to accept that and move forward." And so the decision was made. The conference would be held the next day in the auditorium of the Morgan Development Headquarters. Emily would spend the night preparing, both emotionally and practically, for what would undoubtedly be one of the most challenging moments of her life. Meanwhile, Richard would make one last attempt to discover who was behind the defamatory campaign. He had a pending conversation with Jake, a conversation that could no longer be postponed. The meeting with Jake took place in Richard's office, behind closed doors. Emily didn't participate, but Richard promised to tell her everything later. When they finally emerged from the room after almost 2 hours, Jake seemed pale and shaken, while Richard maintained a neutral, almost diplomatic expression. "Is everything all right?" asked Emily, when she was finally alone with Richard. He took a deep breath before answering. Jake denied direct involvement with the leak to the blog. He admitted to having talked with Vasquez about you, to having shared some personal information he shouldn't have, but insists he would never authorize or participate in a defamatory campaign. "Do you believe him?" Richard hesitated, a visible conflict in his eyes. I want to believe. 20 years of friendship and partnership. It's difficult to imagine that he would betray my trust in this way." He paused, then added, "But there's something he told me, something that partially explains his interest in you." "What?" asked Emily, curious and apprehensive at the same time. "Vasquez isn't just a music producer. He's also an important investor in several of Jake's businesses parallel to our company. Apparently, he was so impressed with your performance at the foundation event that he insisted Jake discover you at any cost." "And Jake, not wanting to disappoint an important investor." "Exactly," confirmed Richard with a tired sigh. "He swears he only tried to open doors for you, create opportunities, that he never imagined the situation would reach this point." Emily absorbed this information in silence, uncertain what to think. Part of her wanted to believe Jake's explanation, to accept that everything was just a terrible misunderstanding that had gotten out of control. Another part remained skeptical, feeling that there were still pieces missing in this puzzle. "And what about the blog? If it wasn't Jake, who would have an interest in defaming us this way?" Richard shook his head. "I still don't know, but we'll find out, Emily, I promise you." As the night progressed, Emily felt the anxiety grow. Tomorrow, she would face the cameras, answer questions, expose a part of herself that she had always kept protected. The prospect was terrifying, but also surprisingly liberating. Lisa noticed her restlessness during dinner. "How you seem worried, sis," she commented, with that acute intuition that sometimes emerged amid the confusion of her mind. "Is it because of those bad people who wrote lies about you?" Emily smiled sadly, impressed by her sister's momentary lucidity. "Yes, in part. Tomorrow I'll speak with journalists, explain our situation. I'm a little nervous." "You've always been brave," replied Lisa with a surprising conviction. "Since we were little. Remember when those boys teased me at school, and you confronted all of them, even being smaller?" Emily nodded, moved by the memory and by Lisa's moment of clarity. "I remember. I always tried to protect you, and you continue protecting, but sometimes—" Lisa hesitated, searching for the right words, struggling against the fog that frequently clouded her thoughts. "Sometimes I wonder who protects you." The Four question hung in the air, simple and profound in its honesty. Emily had no answer. For so many years she had been the protector, the caregiver, the strong one. She had rarely allowed herself to be vulnerable, rarely accepted help, until now. Until Richard. Until this strange situation that, despite all its negative aspects, finally forced her to accept that she didn't need to face everything alone. That night, while preparing for bed, Emily felt a strange peace settle in her heart. Tomorrow would be difficult, no doubt, but for the first time in a long time, she wouldn't face the challenge alone. The press conference was exactly as intense as Emily had anticipated. Journalists from various outlets crowded into the Morgan Development Auditorium, eager for details about the scandal that was beginning to gain national proportions. Cameras, microphones, curious looks. Everything seemed directed at her as she sat next to Richard at the main table. "Good morning, everyone," began Richard, his voice firm and controlled. "I appreciate everyone's presence. We are here to clarify some facts that have been distorted in recent days, and mainly to put an end to malicious speculations that have deeply affected the lives of innocent people." Emily observed him as he spoke, admiring his composure, his ability to command everyone's attention. He briefly explained how she had been initially hired by an administrative error, how he had discovered her musical talent and invited her to sing at the charity event, always maintaining a strictly professional and respectful relationship. Then came the moment for Emily to speak. She felt her heart accelerate, but breathed deeply and approached the microphone. "My name is Emily Wilson," she began, her voice initially trembling, but gaining firmness with each word. "I've worked for Mr. Morgan for a few months. I'm a singer in my spare time, always have been. And yes, I preferred anonymity after my performances, not because I have something to hide, but to protect my privacy and that of my sister, who has special needs." She paused, observing the journalists who were avidly noting each word. "The insinuations published recently are completely false and deeply offensive. Mr. Morgan has always treated me with the utmost respect and professionalism. Any suggestion to the contrary is a deliberate lie aimed at harming his reputation and mine." A murmur ran through the auditorium. A journalist raised his hand. "Ms. Wilson, why do you believe someone would have an interest in creating this false story about you?" Emily exchanged a quick look with Richard before responding. "I can't speculate about others' motivations. I can only affirm the truth. There is no improper relationship between me and Mr. Morgan." What she didn't say, what she couldn't say, was that something was indeed growing between them, something that wasn't improper or scandalous, but deep and genuine, a connection that transcended simple labels like boss and employee, or even friends. Something that both were still trying to understand and define. "Mr. Morgan," asked another journalist, "is it true that Ms. Wilson and her sister are currently living in your residence?" "Yes, it's true," replied Richard without hesitation. "After the leak of personal information and the defamatory campaign, I considered it would be safer for them to temporarily stay in my house, which has 24-hour security. It was a decision taken to protect them from harassment, not for any other reason." The conference continued for another 30 minutes, with questions ranging from respectful to almost sensationalist. Emily remained firm, responding with honesty, but also with a dignity that clearly impressed many of those present. At the end, Richard made one last announcement. "To demonstrate our commitment to transparency and social causes, I have the pleasure of announcing that Ms. Wilson has agreed to lead a new project within the Morgan Foundation. Invisible Voices, a program aimed at people with special needs and their caregivers." Emily looked at him surprised. They had briefly discussed the idea the night before, but she didn't know he planned to announce it publicly today. The initiative had come from her, inspired by her own experience with Lisa and by the work that Richard silently carried out, to support institutions that cared for children like Josh. "This project," continued Richard, "was born from conversations between myself and Ms. Wilson about our personal experiences. My son is autistic. Her sister has schizophrenia. Both of us know the challenges faced by families in similar situations, especially those with fewer resources." A respectful silence fell over the auditorium. It was the first time Richard had spoken publicly about Josh, about his condition. Emily felt a wave of pride and emotion, understanding how much that revelation meant to him. "The Invisible Voices project," he continued, "will offer practical, emotional, and financial support for families in similar situations. But mainly, it will give voice to people who are rarely heard in our society." He looked at Emily with a gentle smile. "And I couldn't think of anyone better to lead this initiative than someone who deeply understands these challenges and has the talent to transform pain into beauty." Emily felt tears forming in her eyes but held them back. She thanked with a nod, unable to speak at that moment. After the conference, as they prepared to leave the auditorium, Jake approached them. He seemed genuinely sorry. "Emily, Richard," he began hesitantly, "I want to apologize again. I never imagined things would reach this point." Emily observed him attentively, looking for signs of falsity, but saw only genuine remorse. "I accept your apologies," she finally said, "but I still don't fully understand why you insisted so much on discovering me, as you say." Jake looked quickly at Richard before responding. "The truth. When I first heard him talk about you, I thought you were just another of his causes." He smiled without humor. "Richard has always had this tendency to adopt lost causes, to want to save the world. I thought you were just another one." "And when you heard her sing," pressed Richard, his voice neutral, but with an underlying intensity. "When I heard her sing, I realized I had found a rare diamond," admitted Jake. "And yes, I saw an opportunity. For you, Emily, for the company, for myself, I won't deny it. But never, never would I have authorized or participated in a defamation campaign. This you must believe." Emily exchanged a look with Richard, realizing he wanted to believe his friend of so many years. "I believe you," she finally said, "but that still doesn't explain who leaked that information to the blog." "We're investigating that," assured Richard, "and when we find out, there will be consequences." In the days following the conference, a relative calm was established. The media found other scandals to pursue. The defamatory blog published an official retraction, and gradually, life resumed its course. Emily and Lisa remained in the mansion, no longer out of necessity for protection, but because everyone realized the arrangement worked surprisingly well. Lisa benefited from the stable environment and Emily's constant presence. Richard appreciated the life that the two brought to his previously lonely house. The Invisible Voices project was quickly taking shape. Emily dedicated herself to it with passion, using her personal experience to create a truly meaningful program. With Richard's support and resources, they managed to establish partnerships with hospitals, schools, and specialized institutions, exponentially expanding the project's reach. On a particularly important afternoon, Richard returned from a trip to Chicago with a surprise. Josh would come to spend the weekend with them. "He's having a good period," he explained, a mixture of hope and apprehension in his voice. "And he asked about you." "About me?" questioned Emily, surprised. "How so?" Apparently, Sarah showed him a photo of us at the press conference. He became fascinated with the idea of the Invisible Voices project. He asked if he could meet the lady who helps Daddy help people like me. Richard smiled, moved. "It's the longest sentence he's uttered in months." Emily felt her heart warm. "It will be an honor to meet him," she said sincerely. "Lisa is also eager." I explained to her about Josh, and she decided she wants to show him her collection of seashells. The weekend was approaching, bringing with it expectations and nervousness. Emily prepared the house meticulously, always consulting Richard about Josh's specific preferences and needs. Lisa, in one of her most lucid periods, helped organize activities that might interest the boy. When Josh finally arrived on Friday afternoon, the first encounter was of touching delicacy. The boy, with his large observant eyes so similar to his father's, initially remained at a distance, examining Emily and Lisa with cautious curiosity. "Hello, Josh," said Emily softly, without trying to touch him or invade his space. "I'm Emily. It's finally a pleasure to meet you." Josh didn't respond verbally but nodded, a small but significant gesture. Richard observed the scene with evident tension, clearly divided between the desire for everything to go well and the fear of seeing his son withdraw as so many times before. It was Lisa who, surprisingly, created the first real connection. "Do you like shells?" she asked directly, showing Josh the box she was carrying. "I have a collection. Some came from the sea, others from rivers. Each one has a story." To everyone's amazement, especially Richard's, Josh approached hesitantly and looked at the box. "Can I see?" he asked in a voice low but clear. "Of course," replied Lisa, opening the box to reveal her meticulously organized collection. "This one, for example, I found in Newport when I was about your age. And this other one." Thus began a gentle conversation between two beings who, each in their own way, inhabited worlds slightly different from ours, but who, at that moment, found a common language. Richard and Emily moved away discreetly, leaving them in that special bubble of communication. "This is amazing," murmured Richard, his voice choked with emotion. "Josh rarely interacts like this with strangers, with anyone, actually." "Lisa has this gift sometimes," replied Emily, equally moved. "In moments of lucidity, she manages to connect with people in an almost magical way." Observing that unexpected interaction, Emily felt something change within her, a silent certainty that they were on the right path. The Invisible Voices project wasn't just a social initiative or a public relations strategy. It was something deeply personal, born from the experiences and challenges that both she and Richard faced daily. The weekend passed in surprising harmony. Josh, although still reserved, showed himself more open than Richard had ever seen him. Lisa remained stable, her stories and gentleness creating bridges where before there had been only silence. On Sunday night, after Josh had fallen asleep and Lisa had retired, Emily and Richard sat on the veranda contemplating the starry sky with a glass of wine shared between them. "Thank you," Richard finally said, breaking the comfortable silence. "Not just for the weekend, but for everything. For bringing life back to this house, for believing in the project, for not giving up even when things got difficult." Emily smiled, feeling a deep peace that she hadn't experienced for a long time. "I'm the one who should thank you, for giving me a chance when everything began with a mistake, for respecting my boundaries, for seeing value in me beyond what I myself could see." Their hands found each other on the table, a simple touch but loaded with meaning. It wasn't a romantic gesture in the conventional sense. It was something deeper, a recognition of souls that had found comfort and understanding in each other. "What happens now?" asked Emily, referring not just to the project but to everything that was developing between them. Richard contemplated the question for a moment, gently swirling the wine glass. "I'm not sure," he finally admitted. "But for the first time in a long time, I'm genuinely curious to find out, and I'm not in a hurry." "Neither am I," agreed Emily, feeling they had reached a mutual understanding. There was no need for labels, for hasty definitions. Whatever was growing between them, friendship, partnership, perhaps something more, could develop at its own pace without external pressures. The next morning, as they prepared to take Josh back to his mother's house, an unexpected call interrupted breakfast. It was Richard's lawyer with news about the leak investigation. "We've discovered who passed the information to the blog," he announced, his voice tense even over the phone. "It was Sarah, your ex-wife." Richard paled, looking quickly at Josh, who fortunately was busy with Lisa in another room. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice low and controlled. "Absolutely. We have irrefutable evidence, emails, bank transfers, everything. Apparently she hired a private investigator to follow you and gather information. Then she passed everything to the blog, through intermediaries." Emily observed the pain and betrayal on Richard's face, feeling a wave of compassion. Even after years of divorce, even with all the difficulties they had faced, he had never imagined that Sarah would be capable of something so calculated and cruel. "What do you want to do?" asked the lawyer. "We can sue her for defamation, invasion of privacy. The evidence is solid." Richard breathed deeply, visibly trying to control his emotions. "No," he finally decided. "We won't do anything, at least for now." "Are you sure? After everything she did?" "She is the mother of my son," replied Richard firmly. "I don't want to drag Josh into the middle of a public battle between us. He's already been through too much." After hanging up, he remained silent for a few minutes, absorbing the revelation. Emily approached, gently touching his arm. "Are you okay?" "No," he admitted with a raw honesty, "but I will be. We will be." He looked at her, a renewed determination in his eyes. "I won't allow this to define us, Emily. Not me, not you, not what we're building together." She nodded, understanding the depth of that decision. It wasn't just about forgiving Sarah or avoiding a scandal. It was about consciously choosing a different path, one that prioritized healing instead of retaliation, future instead of past. In that moment, looking at Richard, Emily felt certain of one thing. Regardless of what the future held, they had found something precious in each other. A mutual understanding, a deep respect, a partnership that transcended conventional definitions. The Invisible Voices project would be just the beginning of a shared journey. There would be challenges, no doubt. Lisa would still have her difficult days. Josh would still face obstacles in his journey. The world out there would still try to label and judge them. But together, not as boss and employee, not as figures defined by their circumstances or limitations, but as two human beings who chose to see beyond appearances, they would find their way. Their story didn't end with a grand romantic gesture or a dramatic declaration. It ended, or rather continued, with a simple dinner shared that night. A moment of normality conquered after weeks of turmoil. Josh had returned to his mother's house, promising to return soon. Lisa was resting in her room after an emotionally intense day. Emily prepared a simple meal, similar to the one she had cooked on the first day she sang in Richard's kitchen. While serving, she began to hum softly, as she always did when cooking. the same melody he had heard at that first unexpected encounter. Richard smiled, recognizing the music, and to Emily's surprise, he began to accompany her, not with perfection, but with a genuine and moving effort. It was the first time she had heard him sing, the first time she had seen him surrender so completely to a moment of pure joy. It wasn't an ending, it was a beginning of something new, still undefined but certainly valuable, a beginning built on error and chance, developed through challenges and revelations, and now flourishing in possibilities that neither could have imagined when their paths crossed by mistake in that kitchen months ago. Life, after all, rarely follows predictable